Thank you.
You get the time and just of a particular book.
Great.
It's hard to write bad books, but it's even harder to write good books. For those of you who are, this is maybe your first time here, welcome to Full Circle Bookstore. We are the largest and oldest independent bookstore in the state. And we make a habit of going after authors with the oldest and the biggest stories to tell. And I think we got a good one in Mr. Gayle here. I'm not going to waste any time. I've got two people infinitely more interesting than me standing next to me. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it on. Let's give another round of applause to our speakers.
Good evening to all of you. I am Reverend Dr. Byron Coleman III. I had the pleasure of being Caleb's professor at the University of Oklahoma some many years ago.
A little bit.
And so he shared with me some months ago, he was writing this particular narrative, this book, sent me a copy of the book. And for those of you who have not yet finished it or have not yet read it, let me share with you, this is one of the most exciting books I've ever read in my life, 55 years. It's a page turner. And what Caleb has put together is absolutely an amazing book. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to have you back in the state where you grew up and where you went to college. And so we're excited. Unlike those other places, we believe this is the best place for you to be. The best place. So Caleb, if you would, let's start with, let's just begin. Tell us about yourself. Of course, let's start there. People need to know who you are, other than your family who knows you.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I think the best way to start is by saying I'm really glad to be home. It's really good to be here. I have a lot of memories, especially with Lavelle and Myron over there, about there's a venue over there that we spent a lot more time at than we probably should have when we were in college instead of studying. But the main thing to tell you about myself is that I grew up here. I wasn't born here, right? Came here when I was about 7 years old, and my parents brought us from New York, which I distinctly remember the day my parents announced that we'd be moving there, in part because my parents are loving people. My mom is right over there to my right. Raise your hand, Mom. Raise your hand. It's not a but. I'm not here to give a caveat. She's a wonderful woman. And in addition, she was, a little strict. And so they were like, we are moving to Oklahoma. It wasn't like let's gentle parent our way into this. Like, how do you feel about Oklahoma? It was like we were moving to Oklahoma. And I distinctly remember when we first got here feeling, one, that we wouldn't be seeing nearly the amount of Black people, I just assumed, than that we saw when we were in New York. Second, I would be mystified for a lifetime as to why. But third, in retrospect, I would be grateful that they did. Because what I feel is that Oklahoma provided for me growing up an encounter with, or many encounters with, what it means to be American in ways that are myriad, right? What I mean by that is here in Oklahoma, historically and presently, there are myriad dreams that people had in coming here, historically and now, and they don't necessarily neatly fit together. In fact, there are collisions with those dreams, overlapping between people groups. And so for me, it always felt as if there was a number of stories to be told about this place. And as much as a lot of us who graduated from this place and left and thought, I'm dipping, I'm not coming back, I always find that in my academic work and even in my journalism, I find myself back here. So the best way to tell you who I am is to tell you that I'm home. And I'm even home when I'm thousands of miles away teaching a course with college students, or even further away doing some investigation into RFK Jr., which is happening right now. I need to go back when this is done and file this story. But even still, I'm home, even if I'm far away. So it's so good to actually be here with you all.
There are so many characters in the book, but tell us about the main character, Edward P. McKay.
Sure.
What led you to him?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there there's a long list of characters. In fact, when you open the book, when you buy it, I'm gonna try it again. When you open the book after you purchase it, you will see many pages that are dedicated to the very front that are just a cast of characters, because that's what this is. But the man at the center of it is a guy named Edward Preston McCabe. And I encountered him initially when I was becoming a member of a fraternity. And I won't judge Pastor Coleman for joining a lesser group. But I know, right? That was low. Anyways, it's my night. I can do it. But at any rate, I distinctly remember we were going to Langston, Oklahoma from Norman, Oklahoma. And usually when I tell this story, explaining it to a group of people, they're like, where they're not from Oklahoma, they're like, where are you talking about? Like, give us some grounding. So it's great to be in a place where I can just say Norman and Langston. So we were driving between Norman and Langston. We had to stay over because we were being officially inducted into Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the first one. Anyways, essentially, like when we were there, we realized that in Langston we didn't really have a hotel to stay in, so we had to stay in Guthrie. And when I was in Guthrie, I distinctly remember walking past on, like, I think it was near Main Street, and there was a plaque there. And this is years ago at this point, right? And that plaque read Edward McCabe. And I read it very briefly because, you know, when you are being officially and formally and legally inducted, emphasis on legally inducted into a fraternity, you might be tired from the extracurricular activities that you were doing in order to get into that fraternity. So at any rate, I distinctly remember, like, I saw that name and I read quickly, very briefly, like what he was about, and thought to myself, oh, that must be fiction, and kept it pushing. In fact, I saw Edward McCabe, and colloquially, it didn't sound like a Black name to me. It sounded like an Irish guy who had an interesting idea. In fact, when I then realized who McCabe was, I was like, oh. And so this guy McCabe was not your average guy, right? He was born in 1850, grew up initially in Troy, New York, but he was from a relatively well-off, never enslaved Black family. So he pursued his dreams. He went to boarding school in Maine and in Rhode Island. He lived for a bit in Massachusetts. He went and worked on Wall Street as a clerk. And being a clerk on Wall Street was no small feat, right? Back then, all you could do was hope for an apprenticeship or just get a job. But being a clerk was your way of maneuvering in a society that was rapidly changing during what we now consider the Gilded Age. Shout out to the best show on television right now, until industry comes back, Gilded Age. But at any rate, what was amazing is that was a time where people were like, they called them counter jumpers. They were so excited about the opportunities available to them that they were jumping over the counters to service clients. But he realized that he was remanded to a relatively meager set of circumstances. He was made to be really much more of a porter than a clerk in New York because he was considered a Black man and unable to do those things. So he moved to where there was great opportunity in Chicago and became an advisor and a clerk to someone named Potter Palmer. And for those of us in the room who either really love history or are more seasoned, you'll remember a company called Marshall Field. Anyone remember that one? Right? Marshall Field, huge department store that was bought by Macy's years and years ago. That's who McCabe worked with and for in their early heady days and advised them. And it's in those places that he picked up certain concepts, right? Which is how to really sell something. In fact, people like Potter Palmer are usually attributed with the term or the phrase, the customer is always right. We're familiar with that one, right? Sell, 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 always sell. It's not from Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross. It's from this group of folks who learned that in these new days, we just need to sell. And what McCabe learned was to sell a dream. And after realizing that he had reached kind of his cap there, he went of all places, not to a Kansas City or Louisiana. He went to Nicodemus, Kansas. And we're going to talk more about that, I'm sure. And I don't want to give too much away of the book. But Nicodemus was on the precipice when he got there of faltering. It was not the promised land that a lot of people who had already gotten there thought it was going to be. A lot of the people who had gotten there were very much unlike McCabe because they had been enslaved. They had lived under the heady days of Reconstruction offering all of these promises. And they had seen just how quickly the US government, and specifically the American South, was willing to rip those dreams away in 1877. And so thousands of them poured. out of places like Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, and on to get to Kansas, not to just escape, right? They came there to build, but they needed a man, a person, a group of people led by Edward McCabe to formulate that plan for what building would get them. Was that enough of a cliffhanger? Good. Okay, go ahead.
In reading this narrative, you said it just a second ago. Edward McCabe was not born a slave. Was raised in somewhat a well-to-do family. What compelled him to come to Oklahoma? What compelled him to leave Chicago? You know,
yeah.
I mean, this is an amazing feat. That he fought for liberation for mass numbers of people. Some he was not even familiar with their plight, only by what he heard, but never what he experienced.
Yeah.
So what drove him to do that?
It's a great question. I was doing this interview for NPR yesterday, and the guy was like flashed a picture on the shared screen. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Much apologies. Appreciate that. Anyways, I was doing this interview for NPR yesterday that I think airs next week, and the host like flashes this picture of McCabe on there, and he's like, "Well, he could pass. Like, why would he do this?" I mean, of course, it was a very insensitive question, but I appreciated it. In part because we have to kind of think to ourselves, well, who was McCabe around? So when you're reading the book, right, you'll see that McCabe was born, yes, in 1850, right? Black people, that was the year the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. It was the year that things were not necessarily going well for Black people, where it seemed as if emancipation was so very far away. But 7 years before, a very important man to McCabe and to this country, one of my favorite leaders of all time, a guy named Henry Highland Garnett, pastor from Troy, New York, who we believe was McCabe's pastor when he was born, preached this phenomenal sermon and really a political rally at the Convention of Colored Men in 1843 in Buffalo, New York, in which he scared, his ideas were so radical that he scared, you're not going to believe it, Frederick Douglass, who was, you would think,
radical himself.
You would think Frederick, but Frederick was still relatively new to this freed life, right? He had escaped himself not too long before. So anyways, Henry Highland Garnett had something, I'm going to give you just a quick taste, a paraphrase taste, but he said, look, take those things that are in your hands, those arms, those things, those tools, and walk up to your master and quote to him the very founding documents that say that they're free and that I'm not. And then tell them if they won't free them, that we're going to have some problems, right? And I think that is the person who McCabe, but the most important line that's always forgotten in this famous speech is that Henry Highland Garnett says, we might be free, but the gulf between us and our enslaved brothers is artificial. It might feel wide. The gulf might feel so significantly extended, but the reality is that we're intertwined, that our fate here as free people is very much tied to the fate of others. So McCabe grew up in this environment where he was, in fact, wedded to them, even if he, in some cases, really didn't share much of their background. And even as that insensitive NPR host said, I mean, he could pass, right? He chose not to. And I think there were significant instances in which, in New York, in Chicago, in Kansas, when he was positioned to be lower than he was capable of. He was accused of being called what was a push ahead because he pushed ahead of his station. And so as such, that's where the desire to go to Oklahoma, because he felt like here, perhaps, even in the Oklahoma Territory, in those 6 counties that made up the Oklahoma Territory and the unassigned lands, perhaps there, Black people wouldn't, for the sake of wanting equity and equality, they wouldn't be accused of being push aheads, right? Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason he turned his gaze towards Oklahoma.
Speak to him becoming the first Black state auditor in the nation. Yeah. Let me add that when I read that he was the first Black state auditor, the first thing that I said to my wife was, he had to be light skinned. That's the first thing I said to her was, it's impossible that a dark-skinned Black man could be elected by white people in an all-white state like Kansas.
Yeah.
So that was Before I even got to that, before
Yeah.
you said that, that's the first thing
Yeah.
that came to my mind. But speak to that about him being elected as the first Black state auditor.
Yeah. So the way that it worked back then, right? So normally we think of how many of you have voted in a primary before, right? I hope so. And if you haven't, I hope you do, right? But what happens, right? There are people on the ballot. You go, you pull a lever, you push a button, you fill out the card, you dimple the Chad, and then you put it inside of the box or something of that nature, where it electronically says, "Thank you for being a citizen," right? But back then, in primaries, you had to do something a little different, right? Because like some of you might not even know who some of your elected leaders are, what they might look like. You probably saw DRI, great. That's who I'm going for, right? Whereas McCabe, the way we're working these primaries is you have to essentially go to these party bosses in every single township and get them to say, "I like the cut of your jib, sure." So every single Republican county and city and precinct committee, he was just riding around the entire state, taking the train when he could, riding his horseback, making the pitch to them. Like, would you like for me? So to some extent, yeah, like it would have been an interesting counterfactual to examine, like, could a darker skinned guy at that time have made that happen? Probably not, especially because it wasn't as if, while McCabe, as you'll find out, is deeply pragmatic, right? Tommy Shelby, a phenomenal Black philosopher, talks about pragmatic Black nationalism, right? Where it's not that we want to build something separate and never engage with the world. Rather, Black people, as a means of survival, collectively organize to then have a seat at the table. That's what he calls a pragmatic Black nationalism. You can disagree with that, but that's kind of his frame. And so he thinks people like a McCabe are similar in that vein. So would it have been easier for McCabe if he was darker skinned? Probably not. Probably would have been way harder. But it didn't relegate McCabe from saying some pretty, as you'll find, direct things. I mean, the first chapter kind of gets you going. It's like, oh, these are the stakes. This is where we're going. Oh, he's not playing, right? And you get that very quickly at both in Kansas and then definitely when he comes to Oklahoma.
One of your interviews, you talked about, someone asked you about the book and to describe it, and you used two words that I thought were compelling, and that was radical liberation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So talk about that.
Yeah.
What does that mean as we put Edward McCabe in the spirit of time, talking about ambition and autonomy and self-governance?
Yeah.
You know, what does that mean to be radically liberated to him?
I think to bring it present before we go backward, I think all of us at some point realize that we might have an ambition that's perhaps just a slight bit bigger than what someone else has said we're capable of, what we feel as if we're capable of. And there's a moment that we come to where we decide, I'm going to try it anyway, right? That is the signature component of McCabe. It wasn't necessarily that he could bank on success. He couldn't. In no way could he bank on success, right? We're not talking about here and now when we have decades upon decades of precedent that, yes, are being undone by the current administration, but we have decades and decades of precedent about how people of color, how poor people might be able to engage in society. But he was operating at a significant deficit. Remind yourself that this was the end of Reconstruction, right? It's like we tried, we failed. Things are getting worse, right? And so at that time, McCabe just said, I'm going to try anyhow. That's the kernel of radical liberation. It's not the sense that you'll succeed, but that perhaps we might have the opportunity to try unencumbered. So, I mean, I think I was in Tulsa last night giving another talk, and I can't help but, I mean, I grew up in church. He wasn't just my professor, he was also my pastor while I was in college. But I always think of the old seaman's prayer, where the sailor says, you know, God, your ocean is so vast, but my boat is so small, right? Like, I mean, I feel as if we've all been there. Like, it doesn't matter if we're trying to save the world or save a family or take care of ourselves. There's a moment where it feels as if the problem, the situation that we're in, is all encompassing, and whatever tool we have is so minor. The radical liberation component in my mind when it comes to McCabe is, I'm going to try anyway. I'm going to keep on rowing. Despite it all, I'm going to keep on rowing. I'm not going to boil the ocean. That's someone else's job. For me, I'm going to row. The difference about McCabe, I think, in contrast, when we normally think about radical liberation, we think of it in a very individuated way. Like, it's on me. It's all on me. I'm going to do it. It's part of the reason we were so insistent that the cast of characters be in there, because it was a much more collective effort. When we think about the American West, when we even think about the history of this country, we usually are told, like, rugged individualism is the way. When in actuality, it's anything but the story. And especially in the story, you're going to see people in partnership with others. And you're going to see a man like McCabe, who admittedly was so ambitious, yes, but paid dearly, especially when he was isolated in that journey. Mm-hmm. When all he could do was row alone, that's when the pains became pretty severe and significant. And that's what you'll see in the book.
What your readers will discover in the book, and I want you to speak to that, is your book is heavily political. Mm. It appears that McCabe used the Republican Party or the political machine to get to the means he was looking for, right? Which leads to the question, was it authentic? Was he really trying to liberate, or was he trying to elevate himself? Or are those two mutually exclusive? Because when I was reading it, I was like, okay, he's using the Republican Party to get to what he really wants. But how much of that is rooted in real authenticity, meaning he really wanted to help these people find a free state?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, in part because it's really boring in journalism or in history. It's super boring to like find someone who's perfect. Like, I don't love RFK Jr., as you might imagine, but as a profile subject, he's interesting, right? You know, you'll be like one sentence into, oh, you know, how was your day? You know, that cell phone is sending electrical waves through my brain, and as such, I can't really, like, it's like, oh, okay. I really love complicated people, right? I don't want perfect people or people who are pitching themselves as perfect. And McCabe, if there are any fatal flaws that man had, and he, like all of us, had quite a few, it was that he was, you know, I love this book. I loved writing this book, but I can say he was an extreme narcissist, right? He was very braggadocious, right? You know, he saw him. Imagine to yourself. It's one thing for you to say, "I would like a state, thank you," right? So that's a big request. It's another request in 1888 to say, and by the way, it'll be primarily for Black people. And then to write down and then say in speeches, we will tolerate white people at a minimum. Like, we're really going for it. And if you thought that was braggadocious, the narcissism's about to hit right now, right? So just stay with me. He then is like, I want Black senators, I want Black congressmen, and I want Black governor. Me?
And I want to be governor.
Me, I'll be that, right? You pick. Right? I'm going to go, and then would then say, like, I am Moses in Pharaoh's court, right, to the president of the United States, right? So, like, to me, I'm not necessarily sure what his exact motivations were, but whatever his motivations were, his actions demonstrated that he was willing to pay some really, really high prices, right? Like, really, really high prices. Finds himself at the end of other people's rifles, right? Like, he was willing to do that. And I don't know, maybe I'm not enough of a narcissist to be motivated to pursue something such that someone wants to shoot me for it. And I'm like, you know what, fine, go ahead. But I think that McCabe must have likewise been motivated by creating it for himself. I think also one other thing, he understood implicitly and explicitly the caps that society had placed on him. And if he's so educated, if he's so elite, if he's so bougie, he's so bourgeois, his best friend in this effort, H.C. Hall Jr., spoke Latin and French and went to med school and was an accomplished Navy salesman. Like, all of these things. And he felt as if this is capped for us, what does it look like for someone who, as you'll see, suddenly, I mean, that word suddenly is important, like, suddenly took off from Mississippi, jumped on a package ship, which is really tiny boats made for ferrying mail, having to kick off the mail to then hop on this boat so it didn't tip over, and find themselves in Texas first, and then maybe Kansas or Missouri, and then spend a cold winter in Missouri with nothing. Like, what sort of caps are on them, right? So I think to some extent, maybe he was projecting this restlessness that he felt with the fact that he couldn't go further than perhaps society wanted him to go. And so I think in some ways, maybe there was a significant amount of alignment between his own personal goals and this goal of a movement that he was trying to create.
Many of the names that are in the forward of the book, people are unfamiliar with.
Oh, yeah.
One name that you mentioned was Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
And then, of course, add to that Booker T. Washington.
Yeah.
And in part of the book, you talk about how Booker T. Washington was clearly more accepted than Edward McCabe.
Oh, yeah.
You want to speak to that? I think that would educate people.
Yeah. So, fast forward to the early 1900s, and, McCabe had built this town called Langston. There were a couple other towns that he'd also built and inspired, but he built Langston. And things aren't going well for him. I'm not going to spoil all of it, but things are not going well, right? It's not hot. It's not looking great. Booker T. Washington comes to town. And no one, by the way, no one has feted or celebrated McCabe. There were no busts that were erected in the middle of the city in Guthrie or in Langston. No one was having Edward McCabe Day. No one was showing up for a Edward McCabe luncheon, right? He was a rebel rouser, right? He was beaten right before then off stage by Billy Bats from various groups who found that his speech shouldn't be allowed to continue. He was not invited to the very Republican convention that he helped organize, right? So that's Edward McCabe around this time. Booker T. Washington comes to town, right? And he's espousing, look. And there's a much larger and longer conversation we could always have about Booker T. Washington. I'll always invite that. But he was like, look, Black people, if y'all just work really hard, gain some skills, keep your head down and avoid the politics, I'm being somewhat reductive on purpose, you'll be all right. McCabe, on the other hand, was being accused of piloting this effort called Negro supremacy, right? So there's a significant contrast between the two. But when Booker T. Washington comes to town, it is pandemonium. Black people, white people, celebrating, excited, losing their minds. There was some estimates that between 5,000 and 10,000 people showed up to listen to him. There wasn't really an overflow room. People were outside, sprawled. They described in gross detail the pearled onions that were served on the plates when he came, in part because he was providing a more palatable message, right? Keep calm, carry on, take your lumps, work a skill, work a job, it'll be all right. And to some extent, I think that contrast is really clear. McCabe wasn't even invited to the event in the town that he founded, right? Isn't that ironic? So I think to me, those moments are so clear, and it also helps me understand, well, why is it that so many other people are celebrated and remembered throughout history in our textbooks, and we find that people who might pursue something a little bit more radical aren't, right? There's a reason why, right? There's a reason why. We can talk about that at any time. More than happy to field questions about it. But that, I think, is a pretty critical moment and turning point in McCabe's life.
I also think what will draw people in is when you finally get to the part of McCabe coming to Oklahoma, this conflict with indigenous people.
Yeah.
I think that's a powerful part in the book. You have all of these tribes that are vying almost for the same thing McCabe is vying for to some degree. And so speak to that. What is that? And do you think that some of those ill relations still were perpetuated down through the years?
Sure.
As it relates to African Americans and indigenous people?
Sure. So I think what's really important to remember, something that was there operating then, that's very much operating now, is something Heather McGee talks about as zero-sum politics, right? The idea essentially, again, I'm being reductive for time's sake, but it's essentially that if I have something, you are losing. If you win, I lose. That there's a very clear binary set of circumstances in which there's no shared progress, shared community, right? So as an example, right, Heather McGee uses the idea of the swimming pool, right? And after segregation ends, the significant amount of rage, even though there was more than enough water in the pool, in a community pool, for all the kids in the community to play in, the idea was, why, if those black kids are swimming in that, if those Hispanic kids are swimming in the pool, my white child is somehow losing. I mean, that's fundamentally what we still see that, right? We still see that in our politics today, maybe not in those stark terms, but we still see it. And so what was going on back then is that the US government has always seen, partly when I say Oklahoma is like the most imminent expression of everything we've experienced in America, is that Oklahoma was and has been, for the United States government historically, a place to just test things out. So almost a laboratorical experiment, right? To identify, oh, like, well, maybe it could work there. Like, let's see. So let's go all the way back to like the 1830s. Let's just take all of those people, those nations, those autonomous self-governing nations, right, that were occupying much of the Southeast, and we're just going to send them west. It's good for them, people like Andrew Jackson would say. I mean, literally, it was good for them is what he would say. And then we'll leave them alone. But they'll have their own little place. They'll figure it out. God bless and Godspeed, right? Then fast forward, we see that those set of treaties right after the Civil War, like all of the other 500 plus treaties the US government's ever had with any indigenous nation, have all gone broken, right? So of course, then it became, okay, well, let's try now to fix other problems. The reality is that McCabe was innovative, not because he was the first person to say, hey, I have a solution for what you all have called the Negro problem. It was that he said, I, a black person, am going to posit a solution in the very place that you've been toying with, right? I'm going to do it. So as you'll see in this book, you're going to go to Liberia. You're going to go to Haiti. You're going to go to a lot of places. You're going to go to the southern border of Texas, where the United States government has said, well, maybe we can just stop all this Negro stuff and just dispatch them as far as we possibly can. And some of that was pioneered by some of our most beloved presidents, chiefly Abraham Lincoln, who wrote a nice fat $600,000 check back then during the Civil War to then test out, well, maybe we should just send the black people and make them Haiti's problem. I mean, Haiti's a free black state, let's send them there, right? So when it comes to McCabe coming here, the issue is that his scheme was called a Negro colonization scheme. And he called himself and a lot of the black people he led colonizers. I said I don't like picking characters who are simple, who are perfect. And McCabe is deeply flawed. And so, yes, you see certain conflicts erupt. You see people legitimately and for good cause being upset seeing their dreams collide with others. Oklahoma has never been a place where dreams go to die. They always are a place where dreams go to collide, right? And under a zero-sum politics framework, that collision means death, right? Whereas in an abundance framework, or in a way in which we believe that there's some shared common purpose, perhaps there was an opportunity, many opportunities, to think very carefully about how we can get along together, as silly as that might sound. Because for over a century and a half, the idea is that we couldn't. We couldn't get along together. Abraham Lincoln openly wondered, how will black people and white people get together after emancipation is over? I mean, are the white people really going to accept 4 million black people in their communities getting the same resources? So we're still in this project of trying to figure out how can we make our multiracial democracy work. And McCabe was very much enmeshed in testing the limits of some of his theories and the theories of what our democracy can look like. And it was incredibly controversial. I told you, I don't really like perfect people or people who think they're perfect. I like people who are complicated, have done some serious wrong as well.
All right, I did my 30 minutes. I want to give them a
Go
chance.
for it, please.
If you have a question, would you please stand up, and you can do that at this moment. And if you, I know you have some questions. In the wonderful half an hour that he's explained a little bit about the book, he can't tell you everything, or you won't buy the book.
Exactly.
Right? So please feel free to ask questions. I have a litany of questions, but I want you all to ask yours. Thank you, sir.
Who's adapted the book? Is it going to be in a movie or?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, wow, you're fast. Sure, I appreciate that question, and I appreciate the vote of confidence by that question, right? So my agent has said, love my agent. Shout out to Chris. Chris is amazing. I love Chris. He told me, I mean, there's been quite a bit of budding interest, but the line that I'm supposed to say is that we are actively in conversations, and we're not at liberty to discuss who is adapting it or who's bidding on it or who will play any of the characters or who will direct it. And then his explanation is people in Hollywood can be very sensitive. So that's all I can say is that I'm very grateful by the reception, right? And very, honestly, very surprised. When you write a book, right? I know I didn't talk much about writing or reporting or researching. Like, this has been the work since 2020, right? You're kind of alone, just like trying to find your way through history. And as phenomenal as the Kansas State historical records, or the same thing for Illinois or New York or Oklahoma's records are, Black people oftentimes exist in the fragments of other people's stories, right? It's not me saying that. Don't be impressed. That was Saidiya Hartman, who's way smarter than I am, who said, yes, Black people often exist in the fissures, the cracks, the chasms, and the fragments of other people's stories. And so it's our job as scholars, as journalists, as researchers, to blow those fragments open and create massive chasms that we then want to fill. And she would say, because she's amazing, with streams of waters that will vivify our lives. I love her. So to some extent, like that's the work. And so you never know when you're doing that if people will care. And so it's beyond measure to see that it's pretty much standing room only. I love that. And that people would then think that it's cinematic enough or cinematically rendered on the page such that it perhaps could work well on the screen. So I can touch that many more people, right? Because that's the goal here. It's audience impact. It's to change minds. It's to explore new ideas. And to, again, amplify the stories that so often get forgotten.
I'm curious, when you were going out in the field, especially in the old Black towns and things like that, what were some of your favorite stories and favorite conversations? And I just toss out that back when I was an Oklahoma historian, one day I ran into John Hope Franklin.
Oh, wow.
And he spent like 5 hours telling stories.
That sounds like him.
That's the type of thing I've experienced. And I'm sure you had a lot of experiences. You can share some of your favorite ones.
Sure. So I'll repeat the question for those who couldn't hear. Essentially, what was your name?
Oh, John.
John asked essentially, like, what was it like kind of exploring when you were out there in the field? Because I traveled thousands and thousands of miles to get places and talk to people. And he name dropped John Hope Franklin, who is considered one of the greatest historians of all time. So essentially, the best conversation happened at the end of a very long day. So one of the people without whom this story could not have been written was in Nicodemus, Kansas. Her name is Angela Bates. And how many people have been to Nicodemus? Wow. Oh, wow. That's more than any event I've ever done. There might be like 90. Yeah, so Nicodemus, Kansas is in the, it's the most, like one of the most northwestern portions of the state. It's not the easiest place to get to. And as you'll see in the book, I don't really include my own, I didn't include myself into the very end of the book, but I do give you a clue as to what happens, right? And there are about 3 flights from Boston, and I drove about a couple hours from a place called Hayes, and I get to this place called Bogue, Kansas, where she has a house, and I walk in, and I'm thinking, one, I'm hungry. I'm a big guy. I'm hungry. Like, I'm not hungry. I'm hungry, right? So I'm real hungry. And I had been told by her cousin and by her over the phone, oh, she has a phenomenal restaurant. It's named after her aunt. It's called Ernestine's. It's barbecue. I don't even eat meat anymore like that. But let me tell you something. I was ready. I had given up meat like 2 years before. I was like, I'm eating every morsel. She told me that she had frog legs. Never had them. Gonna have them. She told me she had like bologna. I don't eat bologna. Gonna eat it. I was that hungry, right? So I get there, and Angela comes in. I walk in, been driving all day, traveling for who knows how long. And she says, well, just like that. Well, like, oh, hey. She said, I didn't feel like opening up my restaurant today because I just wanted to tell you all about Nicodemus, right? And so for the next 8 hours, into the wee hours of the morning, I'm here alone with this woman in Nicodemus, Kansas, learning all about Kansas. And I thought to myself, I'm hungry, right? I want food. The nearest place was a Pizza Hut in like Plainville. And yet and still, the earnestness of that woman. I mean, the fact that she contained like volumes, it seemed like, worth of history, that she's holding this town up to some extent on her shoulders. I mean, I could wait. And I'm big. I love food, right? Like I cannot tell you how much I love food. And I had not eaten because we were on them. I'm not gonna go into it, but like we were just, but like this lady's passion just leapt out at you. You couldn't look away. And literally 8 hours of her talking endlessly about every factoid, things that you now see in the book are because of Angela.
Wow.
They're because of people who refuse to forget these stories. They refuse to do it. And so to me, it felt as if, it's why she's in part acknowledged, and this book is attributed in part to her, because it would have never happened without her. It would never happen without these oral histories that elders carry. And to me, she was worth that honor, even though I was hungry. Woo, I was hungry. Sorry. Other questions? Yeah.
Are there things that you wish you shouldn't have said? Are there things that you left out?
Oh.
Are there, what's missing?
Yes.
There more of?
Sure. So in the world of, so the question was, for those who couldn't hear, were there things that I wish that I could have included? Were there things that were left out? Things that I wish I hadn't said or had said or put on the page? So in my classes, I teach in like the history department and journalism and cultural studies. And in journalism, I'm a pretty ruthless editor. I'm pretty mean, in part because my editors are very mean at the New York Times Magazine, right? And my editor for this book is meaner, right? Because he's so kind about it. He's so calm, right? He always wears, let me just describe him to you. He wears turtlenecks every day, wears a tracksuit over his turtleneck. Doesn't matter, rain, shine, hot, cold, always. And he wears the cleanest kids I've ever seen in my life. Every day, like clockwork. And he's been editing people for book lovers like James McBride or Marlon James, right? He's a phenomenal editor. And he told me, I am not a dogmatic guy. I don't dictate how we work together, but I will tell you when it doesn't work, right? So I'll go off and I write like 30,000 words, right? 30,000. I felt like I was Mark Twain or something. I just like, I did it. I sat, called my wife, I said, babe, I've made it. Like, I want my Pulitzer now. Couldn't tell me nothing. So I sent it to my editor, who reads at a breakneck pace, right? He reads so quickly. It was about two women you're going to see, two very important women, one named Elizabeth Rue Comstock and Laura Haviland. Very important women in this story. And I thought it was clever, too. I was like, oh, well, Black people in America, I thought it was being deep. Black people in America, they can't really experience Genesis. They can't begin until they exit. So let's do the book of Exodus before Genesis, right? I mean, come on, right? Right? J. Cole would sound too deep for the intro, right? And at any rate, I remember I sent it to him, put a little bow on it in my head, and he calls me 2 days later, which is fast, right? 30,000 words for those of you who can't put that together. Anyone grow up reading like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka, the Chocolate Factory? That's less than 30,000 words, right? So I sent him a lot. So I get to New York. He says, you need to come see me. I was like, he's about to be like, man, you need to cover some magazine. I said, go down there. I'm fresh, best suit that I have, nicest shoes. Get there. He's like, this. He had it stacked. He said, this. And he took out a piece of paper and he wrote one sentence. He said, we are so proud of you for these words you wrote, these 30,000 words. It's now going to be this one sentence. I was just like, oh. I started wanting to cry. I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And he's so deadpan with it, like, yeah, all right, you can leave now. Like, he's like very blunt. I was like, I flew to New York for you. He's like, yeah, you should go. And And we call it killing your darlings. And so essentially, like, the way I would describe it for you in most simplest terms, one of my friends, his name is Patrick Radden Keefe, and he has these phenomenal books that you should read long after you buy mine, right? He always describes good journalism as observing a duck crossing a pond, right? And you see a duck crossing a pond, it's just perfect. It's like still, it seems as if it is unbothered and unfazed by anything. But then you look underwater. Have you seen what a duck look like underwater? I mean, it looks like it's about to die. It's just flapping its vestigial limbs, right? It's just going crazy. And he's like, why would a reader ever need to see you flapping your limbs? Why do you need to be showing all your work? What are you doing? And so to some extent, that sentence was the duck crossing the pond. And so he told me, so I love them words that I wrote. I thought that I had created, like, I don't know. I was like, I have arrived. I'm going to sell 1 million copies. And that cutting was so critical to me because you don't care about that. Would have distracted you from the story. The story is one of ambition. The story is an iconic American story. Usually we think about Black history kind of orthogonal or distant or marginal from the American story when it's actually central to it. So all you needed was a glimpse into what does ambition look like in America? And why is it so hard to access or have it validated when you don't look a certain way, when you don't sound a certain way, you don't walk a certain way? And so for me, it took a long time. That's why the book took 5 years, because I was doing a lot of this when I should have been like the duck on the water.
Wow. That's good, Ken. Ken?
I wanted to ask you, what is your why?
What is my
Why?
why?
Why right
Why for the book? Why did you like it?
Oh, yeah. You know, I'm very, so the question was, what was my why for the book? Yeah, man. I've been obsessed. I think maybe because I've just been obsessed with who gets to belong, right? And where do you get to belong? And then when I kind of encountered McCabe, he wasn't necessarily asking, like, could I belong? How do I belong? His question was, how do I create the circumstances for many to dictate the terms on which they belong? And I also thought to myself, the last part is, I think I'm a fairly ambitious person, always have been. And I wanted to see someone who was too big for their britches, someone who was just, and you'll see it, like from page 1, you're like, oh, this not gonna go well for this one, right? Like you see it, like it's not like Byron actually finished it, but like it's not gonna go well from the start.
Yeah.
And it gets violent real quick, right? Like page 4, it starts, right, to get violent. So I just wanted to see someone who tried. And I think the last thing is, I encountered McCabe's story by chance, right? So if many people's stories, and I don't want you to leave here thinking that this only counts for that story, that statement about people existing rather in the fragments of other people's stories. I don't want you to think that that's simply a Black thing, right? So let's roll this back. So Winston Churchill, I can tell you what kind of liquor he liked at what time. I can tell you what kind of sandwiches he liked, because he was a very rich, privileged, somewhat royally aligned white dude in the UK who talked about himself often, right? I can tell you that there are an Abraham Lincoln, highly consequential, love him. There are 16,000 books about Abraham Lincoln in print, not like, and for Stephen back there, that means that like it's circulating somewhere. You can find 16,000 of them. Good luck to you, right? It is not chance that you will run into a story about those figures who are critical to telling a lot of stories about the world. But I'm so tired of people who are not like that. But I want to see more stories about poor white people historically. You're not going to find them in the archival record here as much as you want to. The labor movement in Oklahoma is a phenomenal history. I can't wait for someone to write it. It's going to be really hard because A lot of those people working in the labor movement in the early and mid 1900s were not considered to be important enough. I really want to see more stories about women in the West. I mean, like, the list goes on and on. It's not applicable strictly to Black people, that if you did not have a seat at the table historically, there's a high likelihood that it's going to be much harder to render your story on the page. So I wanted to remove the chance. I wanted to remove reliance on chance as the vehicle by which I would learn about important people. I wanted to add a dose of predictability. I wanted people to encounter McCabe. I wanted this. I wanted a lot of people not to come to see me, but to leave here with something in their hands a little dangerous, right? The opportunity to examine someone who tried, and then to leave with the notion that perhaps I also too should try. Maybe I'm not creating a Black state, right? I don't know if I would recommend that to you. Good luck, but I wouldn't recommend it. But perhaps there's something that you want to do or are trying to do to better yourself, to better your family, to better your community. Try to examine and see that, yes, God, the ocean is so vast. It is vast, and my boat is small. Row the boat, row it together. And I hope sincerely that you leave with that, because if you do, despondence and a feeling of hopelessness are a bit more distant from your reality. So I hope sincerely that that's what you leave with the book, and that was my why.
And so back to your question. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Like, what are the implications of the legacy after the fact? Because I was curious about this going forward, and then it being crushed, and then what happens to people after that?
Yeah. So the question is, what is the legacy of McCabe after he left? I don't want to give too much away, so I'm going to be very short. But there is we often think of, in part because it's closer, right? In time, we think of the Great Migration. Are we familiar with the Great Migration, right? From 1910 to 1970, there were several waves of millions of Black people who left the American South and went to oftentimes more populated urban areas all over the country, primarily far West Coast, Chicago, and the Northeast, primarily, and the Mid-Atlantic. But that, and we also think of like much of the movement of civil rights happening in a much more constrained time. But what we have to realize is that Black people and their movement, in fact, marginalized people of all kinds and their movement, their organizing, their efforts to make change, had antecedents. And so there's a really pivotal court case that I'm not going to spoil for you, that McCabe realized it was worth betting the house on. And that's a landmark. I remember I asked this colleague, so I wrote a good chunk of this book at some place called the Radcliffe Institute over at Harvard. And one of my colleagues was a law professor. And so I came up to her and I was like, honestly, I'm not an attorney. Can you help me understand this case law? And when I referenced the case, I'm not going to tell you what it is, she was like, oh my gosh, like, you know about this? And then sent me 1,000 pages of legal documents that I, sent her questions on like every day as I got through each page. Because I don't know, for those of you who are not lawyers, that's me. Working through legal documents, not my forte, not my favorite thing. God bless all those who do. Congrats, lawyers. You've done it, right? But there is, to answer your question, his legacy is iterating on a template, right? A template for organizing, a template for change, a template for advocacy, right? That's the critical component, right? That's why I think trying is so critical, because you don't know who's watching, right? It's like Sisyphus, right? We're familiar with Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill. I've always admired him. I've always thought he's fascinating. I loved Sisyphus because someone's watching him, learning, right, what it means to find good work, as Albert Camus would talk it, in doing that work, to find that that person's probably happy because they found purpose. And so to some extent, I've always found Sisyphus fascinating. And because I'm with the great Reverend here, to some extent, it's similar to that point that the mayor of Tulsa, who I was in conversation with yesterday, brought up. It's very akin to, when you ask about legacy, it's akin to Hebrews 11, in the Bible where there's this great cloud of witnesses who never got to taste the fruits of the promised land. Moses got to see the promised land. He didn't get to go, right? So part of the legacy is seeing other people that you might never meet do it. So when you asked about my why earlier, part of it is this book will long outlive me. This book will long outlive me. James Baldwin's been gone a long time, but Go Tell on the Mountain can preach today, right? Giovanni's Room makes people feel real uncomfortable now. He wrote that in the 50s, right? And that came out today. That book's banned today. I mean, gone. But it's still making an impact. And he's been gone for a minute.
Yeah.
So to some extent, like the legacy of him, you'll learn more of. And yes, it's suffused very much so in this case that he really bets the farm on, theoretically or metaphorically. But to some extent, I don't know. I think his legacy is the trying, right? It's the attempt. It's the fact that he tried. He did. And I think it's worth you trying in whatever it is that you've chosen to do.
May I have two questions?
Make them roll. Get after it.
My name's Jordan Kelly.
Nice to
I'm
meet
an
you.
old history teacher, current English teacher.
Love it.
In September, I'll be a politician launching a campaign.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you. To what extent is the publishing industry a filter that keeps us from learning about these lesser-known historical figures? And one more.
Oh, go for it. I can do
So
both.
that's the first one.
Oh, okay. He has a cadence. Really quickly, I think Dana Williams, who's a dean over at Howard University, just wrote this phenomenal book called Tony at Random. Again, after my book, and it's really about Toni Morrison as an editor. Right? We think oftentimes of these phenomenal paradise, right? Like these phenomenal, like Nobel Prize worthy, because she got the Nobel Prize for literature, books. But we don't think often about the fact that it was quite odd, right? At that time, for there to be a Black woman editor who was actively publishing people who were not usually considered part of the literary canon. Henry Louis Skip Gates talks often about how Black literature, or just literature that wasn't considered, Philip Roth or something of that nature, love Philip Roth, love his work, oftentimes isn't necessarily considered quality work. And I think publishing is still undergoing that sort of internal work. The reality is that there's a business imperative for publishing more work by other people, because other people want to see themselves represented in the work that people do. So part of it is just, it's not even a question or a framing of justice. It's a question of, do they want to make money or do they not, right? Like, for instance, Black women buy books at a higher rate than most other communities. White women read or buy books at a higher rate than men. Why is it that there were so many men for so many years who were exclusively deciding what the world would read, right? So like we've seen today that publishing is actively having to realize, well, like, how do we expand in market terms our total addressable market? And the way you do that is by getting people who know what other people in the market want. And so as such, I think it's getting better, right? I don't think 40 years ago, they would be like, you know what, let's take a flyer on this Black Moses book. What's your second question, quickly?
Marcus Garvey.
Great question.
Yeah. Just,
I saw exactly where you're going. Yeah.
how did they interact, or how do people think about them?
Sure. There's a phenomenal passage in the book where McCabe interacts with someone named Chief Albert Sam, who is actively trying to get people from Oklahoma who are likewise disillusioned by this point to think about what it might look like to go to the African continent. I'm going to leave it at that because I want you to read the book. But I think that, again, we're iterating, right? We're innovating constantly. McCabe was not the first person to say, let me have the Black people and I'll find a place for us. It's just that his innovation was, I came up with the idea, not the US government, not, as you'll find out, a tobacco salesman named Bernard Koch from New Orleans, Louisiana, who had never really interacted with Black people formally in any way before he decided to come up with an odd scheme that would take you to Haiti. So to some extent, they're iterating, they're innovating, even though they might not have spent much time with each other, they're corresponding in terms of their legacies or interacting with one another. So I won't say too much beyond that, but there's a very interesting interaction between McCabe and Chief Albertson.
All right, can we give Caleb a hand? Thank you. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you all. Really. This will always be your home.
Definitely, definitely.
Let's also give our conversation partner a hand.